Welcome to Metaphor, the Persona-inspired fantasy banger of a game. And this is a build guide / tier list of all the archetypes. I'll just get right into things since I know what you guys are here for, and I'm here to provide with my 60 hours of resetting fights and getting slammed into the ground from all kinds of attacks. This video is going to have two sections, one for the early / mid game and the other is for the late game. There will also be a secret section that will have some story spoilers, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. In the early game, the absolute worst archetype is, it's the one you start with, Seeker. It's kinda sad, but it's just a bit of a weird build since it's a mix of physical and magic damage, forcing you to invest into both stats. I actually don't mind that, and it's personally what my build ends up with anyway. But the Seeker slash damage and wind damage hit like a wet piece of paper. I'd have someone use the warrior archetype and someone else inherit the wind skills on a mage archetype. I'm not even going to entertain a build idea, and the hero special passive, which is only active if the MC is using the archetype, is also not great, but not too bad. This archetype also has no weaknesses, which is really good, even sporting some resistances. Coming in at 13 is Commander. This was a bit hard for me as it's one of the few classes, if not the only one, that can buff allies. Though the more you get into the mid game and late game, most archetypes find ways to buff themselves, or you'll find equipment that covers that aspect for you. It does get decent elemental coverage through its skills like fire, ice, and even wind later on, but you're not going to be doing a ton of damage, I think. What holds it back is a skill that buffs all stats for all allies. There is one, but it's kind of locked behind the synthesis skill. If I were to build this, I would steal some mage passives to give the class some more MP to work with. Next, at 12 we have Brawler. It's an alright archetype with, to me, the only upside being coverage. It gets decent skills and passives increasing its HP, but it's a crit based archetype which isn't great for the early to mid game. There are a lot of enemies that are weak to smash attacks, so it's always good to at least inherit one of these skills or to have a synthesis skills that can put out smash attack damage. For a build, I'd definitely pick up the skill Heat Up from the warrior archetype to increase damage, or maybe Guard Lore from the knight archetype to increase defense, or maybe even Ice Dodge to cover the weakness to ice. Moving on to 11 we have Thief. Honestly, this might be worse than Brawler, but I just personally think it's cooler. Unlike Brawler, this is a dodge-based archetype. The Thief specializes in dark and slash attacks. There aren't many enemies weak to dark type attacks, and if you wanted to use slash attacks, it's just better to use Warrior. It has an okay synthesis skill once it reaches its next level as an assassin, one being able to insta-kill and the other that removes buffs. Finally, in the top 10 we have Gunner. It's a pretty decent physical archetype, especially in the early game, with its AoE pierce skills, self-boosting passives, and skill that gives HP back on kills. This even applies to special hero passives which recover HP after overall combat. It's a simple and straightforward archetype. At 9, I'd have to put the Masked Dancer. Now I know, how dare I, but I really do like this class. At the mid game, it's just really not that good, since you need to equip a mask in the item slot to gain another archetype's moves and abilities. This takes away an item slot, and the base skills for the Mace Dancer aren't that good. It definitely gets a ton better in the late game and after it gets its next tier, but for now it's gonna stay at 9. It does have a really nice hero passive in which it recovers HP and MP each time an enemy stunned or defeated. Moving a bit closer to the top, at 8 is Berserker. You probably won't be able to access this class until you're decently deep into the mid game, but I just feel like it doesn't offer as much. It's basically a buffed up brawler, which is pretty funny. It's one of the only archetypes to double dip more than normal. It does have a leg up in the fact that its synthesis skill covers all physical types of damage, which is really good. As for inherited skills, I just pick up some attack boosting ones from the warrior archetype. At 7 we have Faker. This archetype isn't really meant to be a main archetype in my eyes, as the most that comes out of it are the debuff skills. Its main draw are those skills, as no other class can really consistently put them out. So learning it and inheriting those debuff skills to actually put out a lot more damage is where we get those big numbers. Now, the cutoff for number 5 is Merchant. The only reason I put this guy up so high is because the amount of grinding I had to do to get the best weapons in the game. Not only that, but you need to get the gear, the money, and Magla was only possible thanks to this archetype. You can use its skills even when you run out of MP, and most importantly, later down the line, this is the archetype that gives you access to the Almighty Boost passive. For the sheer farming help this class provides, I think it's worthy of an almost top 5. Now moving into the top 5, we have Summoner. It is a really strong archetype no matter how you slice it, as it puts out a crazy amount of damage and has unique elemental coverage as you can craft more summoning circles. You don't need to equip these like the Masked Dancer either. It has alright elemental coverage, but what really held it down for me are the really high MP costs. I don't really think there's a passive in the game that halves SP cost, but there is one for the synthesis skills. This is one of those archetypes that jump up in power level near the end of the game. Also, you don't really get a good weapon for this archetype for a long time, or maybe I just missed it. At number 4 we have the Knight, a very solid archetype through the entire game. I often use the Knight and that line of archetypes as my defensive and buffing character. They also have plenty of strong passive skills, one that even reflects attacks. This is really good since it can cancel out complete boss cycles if one of their attacks gets deflected. One of the best supportive archetypes to have on your party, being able to tank, heal, and buff your party. Not only that, their physical skills can help with hitting weak points, and their synthesis skills can be surprisingly heavy hitters. The inherited skills I would use are the ones that increase defense and HP in any way. Now the top 3. The first one is the Warrior. It's front-loaded with really good AoE damage, hitting all enemies for heavy hits. Not only that, but it gets the passive slash boost in its base level. This is something you will be inheriting as you keep upgrading the archetype. Heat Up is also a great skill to pick up in the same vein. The Heat Up passive is pretty good too, since there are a lot of times where I get caught off guard and start a fight at a disadvantage, which was really annoying. Now what really pushes this above the other martial classes are the synthesis skills. Vorpal Blade does extreme AoE slash damage, and Bamboo Splitter and Peerless Stone Cleaver have a unique condition that if it does kill an enemy, an action turn is returned to you. Using this on enemies weak to slash damage basically gives you infinite turns. The only downside to this archetype is the wind weakness, but I think the upsides more than make up for it. Alright, I think it's pretty obvious, but the second best class has to go to the Mage archetype. It's just peerless as one of the most consistent magic damage options in the game for a long time, and it stays that way all the way into the late game, which is where it falls off. But for the mid and early game, this is the archetype that carried me through it all. Being able to have the wide magic coverage and the synthesis skills of being able to hit multiple targets make it an early and mid game demon. The skills I inherited were Magic Circle and Magic Font, and if you want you can add even more elemental coverage by picking up a wind skill. The Hero passive also restores MP per overworld kill or stun, so that's pretty good for an MP based class. Some of the things that hold it back is the weakness to pierce attacks, which is decently common, and another thing is the last level, aka the elite archetype, takes a while to unlock. Now finally, the top spot is the support archetype Healer. Honestly, without constant healing and reviving, removing debuffs and status effects, the game would be pretty difficult. A good healer is usually the backbone of a great party, and it's the same in this case. Weirdly, a lot of the skills I inherited were from the same archetype line since it wouldn't learn it in its next step up. My main lineup for this early to mid game was Warrior, Mage, Healer, and Summoner. By the way, real quick, it would be awesome if you guys subscribed. It would mean a lot to me. Do you guys want to see me do a challenge run of the game? If so, what kind of challenge? Anyway, now the late game. I won't spoil too much in this section, if at all any, but there will be a short secret tier list at the end for some special spoiler archetypes. I'll warn you again when we get there, as those archetypes are the pinnacle of power. Okay, for the endgame, I'm going to stack this up against the Trial of Dragons. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. It's probably the hardest challenge you can take on, even harder than the final fight, just because by the time I got to the final fight, I was bricked up and built like a Greek god from how hard I could eviscerate something off the face of the planet. Now, these are all going to be the strongest form of the archetype, aka the elite archetypes. I think the worst is Dragoon, aka the Gunner archetype. This thing is some hot garbage when it comes to the thick of it. The passive skills it picks up is alright at best, and it tries to be this backline piercing and magic attacker, which is kind of hard, since why would I want that when I could either have a dedicated physical attacker or a magic attacker. Plus, there are hybrid archetypes that just do better than what this does. But hey, it does look cool, so I'll give it that. Coming up hot right after Gunner is Commander, who is now Warlord. Honestly, it just kinda stays the same, moving your party back and forth into an offensive or defensive position, which is weird because it costs absolutely nothing to do that on your own. It does get some okay support passive skills and boosts like buffing attack and defense for free. The synthesis skills are supportive in nature, but nothing to write home about. If I wanted a support archetype, this would be my last choice. I'm going to put the next two together in the 12th and 11th spot because they're both equally aggressively average. It also kind of steps on each other more than any other archetype. It's the Berserker and Brawler. They both excel in smash attacks and both use HP manipulation to put out even more damage. I do think Berserker is a bit better because of its amazing passive skills that come with it, and the physical attack coverage in its synthesis skills. Revenge Seeker, Health Vessel, and Short Range Boost really put this a step above Brawler. Actually yeah, the Berserker is better than Brawler, so put that in the 11th spot. They both get some elemental skills too, but you're probably not going to use that, I think. In 10th, I think it goes to Soul Hacker, aka the Seeker archetype. Other than the name being a cool reference, this is probably just as mid as the game itself. It's a class that focuses on elemental and physical damage that also gives back MP. It does learn the skill Heat Riser to buff itself, some healing spells, and now instead of just wind, it also learns fire skills. The synthesis skills are pretty okay as well. Alright, moving into the 9th spot, I would put the Trickster. Yes sir, that's my boy right there. It's just for Debilitate, that's it. That's just how much I value the skill Debilitate. The increase in damage and survivability it provides is just amazing. With some tinkering, this could be a really strong supportive archetype with the right inherited skills, but I personally just took the skill Debilitate and slapped it onto my other support archetypes. Moving into the 8th spot, which is a bit more usable to me, is Ninja. I think what it's going for is a dodge melee archetype. It's a playstyle kind of thing, as you can buff your dodge rate incredibly high with abilities like Agility Lore and Third Eye. There's also an item or passive skill in the game that makes it skip the entire enemy phase on a dodge instead of just 2 turn point actions. I just never tried out the style too much to put it any higher than this, but maybe if invested into it could be a strong archetype. It also has high dark damaging skills, but again, there aren't too many enemies weak to this type of damage. At 7th, we've got my favorite fat boy, Tycoon, aka Merchant. This is basically the best way to farm in the game, and mind you, with skills like Item Connoisseur, Lucky Find, Critical Trade paired with its high crit rate skill attack that costs no MP, it makes Tycoon a really strong farming archetype. And in my case, I did a lot of farming for the higher difficulties. Like I said before, you also get the Almighty Boost passive, which let's just say comes in really handy. Now up in 6th, I'd have to slot in the Persona Master. At this level, it's basically the jack of all trades in the game. You just need to craft a mask to use as an item like before, but now it can be of an elite level archetype. I use the Persona Master as my support archetype since its main gimmick lets you weakness break targets, which is really important later into the game. Personally, I use the Healer Mask to make it my core healer for the team. A fun team comp could be Persona Master and 3 other physical attackers. I'd use the synthesis skill Masquerade Charge, which I think is the game's version to Concentrate, then just unleash hell. Now we make it into the top 5, which are the Paladin / Dark Knight archetypes from the Knight line. I think Paladin is overall weaker than the Dark Knight, but still pretty good. Again, this is a great defensive class that can just put out decent damage and support. It gets really good passives like Flawless, which is an amazing skill to inherit by the way, Pierce Boost, Instant Recovery, Magic Counter, and I'd make sure to grab Holy Knight's Proclamation either way I go for the archetype. It's a really solid playstyle and a welcome addition to any party. I would slap on any other defensive passives or HP increasing passives to bolster the class even more. Or you can add more utility by making it your debuffer as well. Just missing the top 3 is the Elemental Master and Warlock. Warlock is only here because it's trash. Yeah, it's horrid. The only thing that this archetype provides is the skill Hyper, which supercharges magic attacks. This is the one skill I'd inherit to the rest of my magic attacking archetypes. As for Elemental Master, it's just a stronger version of the Mage, which was my top damage dealing archetype from the early to mid game. Making sure to pick up Hyper, you can add Mage skill attack ups or even more elemental coverage in terms of damaging skills. Breaking into the top 3 this time is Savior from the Healer archetype. Now this is where it gets dicey, since this is going for your main support archetype spot. It gets all the healing skills you need, team revive, status and debuff removal, and highlight damaging skills. I'd also give it a weakness break skill because in some fights it is absolutely necessary. The only reason this is higher than the Persona Master is because you can use an item other than just a mask, which can bring more to the team than just some skills in some cases. Though this changes because, well, you'll see soon enough in the secret chapter. At number 2 we have Samurai from the Warrior archetype line. The only reason this doesn't take the number 1 spot is because there are a lot of enemies that resist or are immune to slash damage, be it trash mobs or a few elite bosses. This can be one of the highest damaging archetype as it gains Concentrate and the incredibly powerful synthesis skill Crimson Moon Sword Art. You also get a more buff version of Bamboo Splitter and Phantom Sword Swarm, which also adds a turn icon upon a defeated enemy. And immunity to fire is pretty good as it's one of the most common magic used by enemies. I think at least, don't quote me on that. I'd inherit Slash Boost and some more attack boosting passives to round out this archetype. Now at number 1, it goes to Summoner, one of the most versatile and hard-hitting archetypes in the game. There aren't a ton of things this archetype can't handle. Not only that, but the insane synthesis skills this unlocks is game-changing, as almost all of its attacks have secondary effects that are pretty strong, one even lowering attack and defense. I'd slap on Magic Boost, Magic Circle, Magic Font, and Magic Link, which halves MP cost of synthesis skills, as it really saves you from burning through your MP. Or you can use Arcane Unity, which increases the strength and hit rate of synthesis skills. Either way, this is my top spot for my late game archetypes. Okay, now for the true endgame. This will have major story spoilers, so if you aren't in the last chapter of the game, this is your chance to leave. Okay? Okay, now let's talk about the Royal Archetypes, the strongest of them all, and the only reason I beat the game. Now, it kinda sucks not all archetypes have a Royal Archetype, but of the ones we do have, I'll try to break it down. The weakest of the Royal Archetypes is the Royal Knight. I feel like it's too similar to its non-royal counterparts and doesn't change the level of the playing field like the other ones do. This really sucks because I really do like Hulkenberg. Pause. So I think old me was pretty stupid because I didn't realize that Hulkenberg actually reflects all physical types of damage. Yeah, in her final stage, she just reflects it all, which is so broken. I'm putting this above 5 and 6. She instantly 5th place at least, a minimum. Alright, continue. Next up, at 6th is the Royal Thief. This is because, like the Royal Knight, it feels like it's just a little bit of a step up than its elite level archetype. Its synthesis skill lets you remove status, repels, and strength buffs on a target, which is really strong. It gets haste lore, which greatly increases hit and evasion. Third Eye and Noble Thief's Soul, which is the passive that depletes all enemy turn icons if their attack is dodged. At 5, I have the Royal Berserker. It's like the Royal Thief when it comes to its attacks, as it specializes in smash attacks instead. It also has a synthesis skill that removes status, repels, and strength buffs, which is really useful. It also has the skill Charge, so this is where it was. It also gets the skill Peerless Warcry. Bosses really like to use this because it decreases all stats for all enemies. It gets Strike Surge, which increases damage by 30%, and you can add on to this by adding Strike Boost to get a free 50% attack buff to all strike attacks. Its special skill Noble's Berserk Soul is decent, as if you land a critical hit, it doesn't cost a turn icon. Now at 4 we have the Royal Masked Dancer, the strongest royal support archetype in my eyes, as now you can inflict weakness break on all enemies without synthesis skills, which is extremely important. It also gains Ruin's Flameflower, a really pretty skill that removes all target buffs on a hit, an extremely useful effect. It also gets Magic Surge to increase magic damage, and the unique effect Noble Dancer's Soul, which prevents turn icon loss when killing an enemy with magic. I had it inherit Debilitate and some healing skills as it became my main support archetype. Now onto the top 3. These are so powerful and close in level, it was pretty hard to place them. And by that I mean the 3rd and 2nd spots, because the first is powerful beyond reason. The Royal Summoner stayed in my party, and I feel like it is the 3rd most powerful royal archetype. It can cover any element with extreme AoE damage. Not only that, but has powerful secondary effects like attack and defense decreases, instant KOs, frostbite, daze, and even more. It can even full heal and revive the party all in one skill. I inherit Magic Boost, Magic Circle, Magic Font, and Magic Link, a super cool looking archetype to boot. At number 2 is the Royal Warrior, Broken. This archetype gets Hasatobi. Yep, it also gets the skill Concentrate. Are you guys seeing any similarities? Not only that, but it gets the passive ability Slash Surge, giving it a 30% boost to slash attack damage. We stack Slash Boost onto it, and that's a free 50% boost to all slash attacks. You know the deal. On top of that, Noble Warrior's Soul gives you no turn icon loss if you kill an enemy with a physical skill. Do I need to say more? This is the build that breaks Persona games. Now at number 1, it's the Prince archetype, the strongest royal archetype in the game. This has everything, a powerful AoE light skill which is really nice as many waves are weak to it, Royal Slash and Heroic Slash are almighty attacks that deals bonus damage to humans, which is really important as those are what you face most of the time at endgame. Hero's Cry gives you 4 extra turn icons, Hero's Proving buffs all your stats, and Morale Boost and Resist All are amazing passes making you just take half damage from everything. It also lets you gain HP and MP in the overworld. I added Almighty Boost, Magic Link, and Magic Circle, which increases magic attack by 10% for every archetype of the same type. In this case, my entire party was Royal Archetypes, so I think that's a 30% boost in damage. It has extremely strong coverage moves as its synthesis skills, the best being Royal Sword, which does severe almighty damage with bonus damage to human type monsters. It is broken. And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed, and drop a sub.